So let's move on to discussing live instrumentation and electronic music. Part of why I hear people talk about this idea of taking live instruments and putting them into an electronic context, and I found that for a lot of people, they struggle to know how to implement them. They struggle to know how to mix them, and they struggle to know like what is the appropriate place for them. And I think we can talk about kind of all of those subjects. I think this touches on kind of what everyone was asking about these. So we'll start with the last thing, which is when to use them. Then we'll talk about how to implement them. And then we'll talk about how to mix them, right? So if I'm looking at like an electronic track and where to add real sounds, first I have to look at, well, what kind of song am I writing? Because adding sounds into a dubstep song is going to require a different treatment from adding songs to a house or adding instruments to a house song, for example. Some genres allow for easier implementation of live instruments. Every genre can do it, don't get me wrong. Every genre can have live instruments. Some have more trouble than others. But knowing the context can give you a direction on how to apply them. So let's just get a simple house loop going and think about how we can add in live instruments to it. Then we'll do the same thing with like a dubstep or a drum and bass beat and ask ourselves how we would apply instrumentation there. So let's just get a house loop. Sure, that'll be a good texture. Add a little fill here. And cut this out. And then get a drum fill, 128. Now let's get just some effects, because I'm just building the bed, right? I'm just building the sound bed for this song. I'm not really worrying about what it is. I'm just trying to get sounds. So let's grab like this. Come on, please. Pull you right at the end of this. All right, now let's get like a... I'm just getting a couple of different effects here. These are all going to be samples. Hold on. Yeah, so we'll pull this down here. And then duplicate that. Pull this down. And I just want to grab like just some little transition effects right here. We're almost done. I just want to build up the basic idea. Yeah, so something like this should be good. This is not in time. No, it is in time. And then just one last little sweep. Right here, and then we're good. So this is like our basic idea, right? Just to kind of get our loop grooving, right? So now let's think about what sort of things we want to add in here, right? So let's try a couple of different synth elements and a couple of different live elements. I was actually going to go straight into that, Justin. That was going to be one of my first examples. And this is where context comes in, because this feels like a very warm, inviting, pleasant kind of song. My brain, listening to this, takes me into kind of like some pleasant chord world. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have a very basic chord progression. That's just the idea, right? It's just this walk up of D flat major, C minor, F minor. Like that. So let's just go ahead and record that in real quick. Give myself a smidge of a count in. Oops, sorry. New keyboard. So there's our chord progression. This is kind of the standard house instrumentation, right? We accept pianos in almost every style of music. That's this nice little chord progression. Let's go ahead and shrink the whole thing down, pump it up a little bit. But how do we fit this in, right? Well, first things first, we want to make it feel a little bit more kind of robotic without the notes or the sounds feeling robotic. We're already a bit kind of quantized as it goes in season 1. But let's give a little bit of chorus to this piano. Just a little bit. Without it. So it's a little bit flat. And like I said, the idea here is to make it feel a little bit more robotic. Or I guess a better way to put it is I want to make it feel a little bit more synthetic. Because when you're adding live recorded instrumentation to genres, you have to think about sort of what all the other sounds are doing and how their frequencies seem to be moving. Live instruments do not have their frequencies really move the same way as digital instruments or VSTs or synthesizers or what have you. So, by altering the timbre of these live instruments to make them fit a little bit closer to the aesthetic of dance music or of electronic music, you allow the listener's ears to sort of accept them more. This is a big reason why you'll hear like flangers and phasers on live recorded sounds in electronic contexts way, way, way more often. Because they have that textural component added in, and it makes it feel more electronic, essentially, because you're using what was once an audio error as an audio feature. How's it going, Audion? We can also start adding in things like reverb and delay. I'm going to use a very digital sounding delay, something that's going to really clearly indicate we're in an electronic context. I wouldn't necessarily use this type of delay in a live or in a live type of context. If I was making like pop music, or not pop music, if I was making like rock music or blues, I probably wouldn't use this kind of delay. But in this context, oh shit, thank you so much for the 100 bits, Season 1. I appreciate it. Now without it, let's listen again. Really flat. Now the piano starts to exist in the world of all of these big electronic elements let's pull this back a little bit and let's think about what other elements we could add. So I'm going to add a new channel with Command-Shift-T. I'm going to copy this MIDI down, but I'm going to legato all of these notes so that each one extends its full length. I'm going to grab Electric Sunburst, which is a guitar sampler. And this is going to help us look at how we can add, first I'm going to do electric guitar, but we'll see if we can make this work with an acoustic guitar as well, Justin. But it'll be tougher. Electric guitars tend to work a little bit better than acoustic guitars in electronic music, mostly because it is more digitally processed more often, but you can make it work. But let's just look for what I'm hoping is a simple arpeggio. I don't want something that goes through the actual chords, because we have an element that plays chords here. Now I just want something that plays just specific notes, because we're going to layer this up. That's going to be the next process, is we're actually going to be layering up this rhythm. So let's grab Arcade. See if there is actually a melody here. I think this one is melodic. It's a little bit too kind of lyrical. Kind of fun. Let's see. Let's try a different preset, because I think this is a little bit too much. This one's going to be more of an arpeggio. That's more of like a melody. I know it's a bit too aggressive, so let's try, and this is part of it, it's finding the rhythm that works. There we go. And the tone will also help. But this is kind of what I'm looking at, right? But if you notice, this sounds great, but in the mix, it's a little bit lost. So now, similarly to the piano, I want to make this a little bit more interesting. I want to start adding a little bit of processing to this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little bit of distortion to the sound. I'm going to do about 5 dB up. I'm going to pull about 3 dB out. What you're going to hear is adding a little bit more harmonics to the sound. Now I'm going to make it a little bit more present by adding a grain delay. I have this preset that I use quite a bit. It just takes the sound, and every eighth note, it has an eighth note delay that's pitching up over an octave every time it feeds back into itself. You can hear it just barely if I pull it up. That's what I'm adding. But like, super subtly. But notice how much life seems to disappear from this. From some almost imperceptible delays. And believe it or not, we'll hear those, and that'll impact how we hear it in the mix. So now, without it. Notice how it kind of pops out of the mix a little bit more when I have this on versus when I have it off. It just feels just that little tiny bit more dull. So the only thing I want to do here is compress the sound a little bit to sort of adjust the dynamics. I'm using glue compressor just because I find that this is a nice VU meter for showing off the concept. I've noticed some people get a little bit confused when I use the stock Ableton compressor, even though I feel like this shows a similar amount of information. So just keep an eye on essentially this VU meter in the center. I want this since I'm not trying to make an aggressive sound. And again, this is just coming from experience. It's not like I know that for every sound, I want it to have this ratio or this setting, but I know that generally, if I want light compression, I want to have one of these settings for the attack time. I don't want to slam it, and I don't want it to be essentially almost not affecting the sound. I want it to be in this range of 1 millisecond to 0.1 millisecond. Depending upon the sound, if I want to make sure there is no transient at all, I'll slam it. But typically, like around here for gentle compression, and then around here for gentle compression or automatic, depending upon what I'm working with. I usually don't touch the ratio, but like softer, standard, more aggressive is the way to think about it. And then I just pull down the threshold until I'm seeing about 5 decibels of gain reduction. I'm not looking for exactly 5. I'm not looking for exactly 5. I'm just looking for around there to when the sound starts to kind of catch on the compressor. You'll sort of hear it snag on as I lower this down, right? Not seeing anything yet. We're starting to see it happen. There we go. Did you notice how right when I passed around minus 28 decibels, the guitar kind of locked in? I don't know if you noticed that. I'm going to pull it back up, and I want you to keep an eye out. You'll see this meter will really start to jump around 5 rather than underneath it. And you'll really start to hear, especially think about the transients, and think about the relationship of those transients to these sparkly upper textures. I'm even going to pull this back a little bit to make it more subtle, because the compressions are going to bring it out more. I could probably reduce this release a little bit. Yeah. Now, for me, if I A-B without it, obviously it's a little bit quieter. I haven't adjusted the makeup gain, but it feels a lot more close in terms of how it lives in relationship to itself. So I can pull this up about 5 dB. Feel the difference? Feel how it kind of like, I wouldn't say this is breathing with the track, Justin, but it is more controlled in how it breathes on its own, right? This does not count with, I would not call this necessarily mixing. This gets back to that first thing of context and processing the sounds. The makeup gain is adding back in volume. So if I have this off and we go to the meter right here, keep an eye on this number right here where it says minus infinity. That's silence. I'll turn this off. It's hitting at about minus 13, minus 13.5 decibels. When I turn this on, it's at about minus 13. We've lost about 3 or 4 decibels of volume. So it's just adding back in that volume. And I learned in school that it is about 3 decibels of gain change for something to be seen as 1 dB louder, or something to be perceived as 1 dB louder. So it makes sense that it's perceptibly quieter, but not by much, because there's only about a 3 to 4 dB change. So let's pull this back up. So now, we're just adding back in that gain we lost. That's it. And for me, what this is doing, I wouldn't call this mixing the guitar. This is processing the guitar in order to make it fit within the context of the track. Because remember, we're only on like that first and last category of the context of the song and how you would add the sounds to the project, not even how you would mix them in with everything else, because that's a different process, right? But let's listen to this in the mix without all these effects added in. It's okay, but let's now add all these effects in. Now it feels so much more connected to this song. It feels like it fits within the emotional context of it. Now, what I need to do is layer this up. Now, I'm going to have to do this by hand because I don't have the ability to take... Well, I wonder if I do. Can I? If I take this from 3, I don't think it'll work. Oh, I wonder if I can do this. Hold on. I want to check one thing. I'm just checking to see if I can, because I notice here I can actually select contact. I was hoping I could actually. No. I'm just seeing if I can basically output that MIDI. No, I can't. So I'm gonna. Oh. Nope. Prefix. I'm just keeping an eye out for that. So yeah, it's not letting me grab that, but it's. Boom bum 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 boom bum 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 boom bum 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 boom bum 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 bum. It's just arpeggiating through these notes. So all we got to do is real quick transcribe that. This will be the hard part if you aren't used to layering sounds, but it'll be good for you. So what we're gonna do is we're just going to pull this. Actually, I'm going to keep these legato. I'm just going to mute the notes because all we're doing is layering it on. So let's go ahead and add in this right here. Dun, dun, dun. And I'm just getting the rhythm here. Whoops. And you see how the melody starts to come out, and I'm just basically just going to transcribe this. I'm actually going to take all these notes right here and copy them down an octave so I don't lose them. Let's go on blank poster. And this is the big painful part where you're just kind of duplicating the MIDI out. I'm not going to go through that whole process. I'm going to be a little bit lazy, and we're going to essentially just loop the first 2 bars of this. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. So let's go in and let's find some sort of plucky synthetic element to layer with this guitar, right? So let's look for anything. What's funky pluck? Sure, that might be great. Ooh. So same sort of thing as before. I just want to put this into some sort of space. So I'm going to use a reverb here. Cool, so that sounds pretty good. Let's see how it sounds in the mix. So now our guitar is being processed on its own, and it's being layered with this synth pluck. Which Now it's starting to move a little bit further away from a guitar. So if you wanted it to kind of preserve its integrity as like an acoustic sound, I would be careful with how you're applying this. But you can totally do it. And in fact, there is some cool stuff you can do. Because right now, the synth feels really like present. But what if this was only meant to provide the space for the guitar? Let's make this dry wet 100%. Isn't that kind of weird how it feels like the guitar is now so much more important, but we have like this interesting synth tonal layer behind it that's creating its reverb? Little things like that can really help something fit into the mix, because now we have this extra context, just going back to that idea of this arpeggio. And then the last thing I want to do is add in a bass line, which I'm just going to use the Scarby J bass. We're just going to boom, boom, but down a boom, 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 boom. Let's see how that works. Oh, wait, what was our chord progression again? Hold on, I totally forgot where we're at. So, oh right, because that's so we are in that's our chord progression. So let's try and get this going. Slow this down a little bit because I realize it's a little bit too fast for what I can play at. So I'm just going to play this a little bit slower. Now, it's kind of shitty. We have this kind of shitty slap bass line, but it's house music. Doesn't have to be perfect. Obviously the MIDI's a little bit fucked, but, you know, I can clean this up and get back to this idea. Sudden, all of a sudden we have a song. This might need a little bit of compression because it's a little bit pushed back, but limit that a little bit. That's all you need. now, pretty much all of these elements are live except for the drums, right? But yeah, this would be one way to do it. Let's actually scale this back a little bit. I'm gonna get rid of the lead. I'm gonna get rid of the guitar. I'm gonna take this guitar MIDI, and I'm going to add it to acoustic, or strummed acoustic, this thing right here, excuse me, which is another Contact guitar library. And so we can see how we can maybe try and add in acoustic guitar to this idea. Let's get maybe songwriter, because I think that'll be in the vibe we're going for once this loads up. I'll check it out, see what it sounds like in context. Because this will change what we can add on top, right? The context of these synthetic elements is that it connects with this electric guitar right here. Which I think I fucked up, but that's okay. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm actually going to extend this back out to the full chord progression. Now, if I just unmute this, do you think it's gonna work? Can't even hear it. It's at max volume, but can't even hear it. We could obviously turn everything else down to fit in with that, for sure. Could turn all this down, could turn all this down. And that's one way of working. But this is giving yourself a lot of headroom. So if you're working quiet, this could work, but you're probably gonna wanna do more processing, because like if I turn my speakers up, it's going to all of a sudden get so much louder, and I'm going to be back at the same problem I was at when these were all at kind of their full volume, right? So let's go back and let's look at how we can process this to maintain the acoustic sound while fitting in with the context of electronic music. Because one of the issues with electronic music is that it's incredibly loud to work against. It is a loud genre. Most electronic music tracks are fairly loud. They tend to have more dynamics these days than they used to, but we're still looking at some loud-ass tunes, right? So let's see what we can do. My first instinct is going to be actually to add, again, distortion to the sound. Because distortion, not only does it add volume, it adds harmonics to the sound. If I properly gain stage this, right? So I'm gonna grab Spectrum, just so you can see what's going on here. Without it, we're at about -17, -15. Now looks like about -15. I'm gonna add this in. We're at -17 or -7, so I need to do about an 8 dB. Looks like about right, about 8 dB cut to properly gain stage this. Let's look and see what's different, right? It's very subtle. Do you see how these higher harmonics right up here seem to grow? Watch. See, it's a very subtle effect, but it's really bringing up these higher harmonics. It's a really subtle effect. So, now, let's start adding a little bit of processing to this. I'm actually do a little bit more distortion to this. Overdrive usually doesn't add a ton, but now I want to focus in on that fundamental frequency, which looks to be around 80 to 100 hertz. It's really amazing for me what a little bit of overdrive does. This is pretty much just filtered distortion. So now, basically, I'm doing two things here. I'm starting to squash the dynamics of this sound to make the loudest and quietest points closer together. And I'm also adding harmonics to the sound to make it a little bit more present in the mix. Now let's turn all this off and see what it does to the context of everything else. What's wrong, mute? Notice how much more obvious the guitar is now. Listen, without it, it's the same volume, right? About -16. Okay, maybe it's a little bit louder, so let's maybe turn this back down a smidge. Oops, not the whole thing, just the utility plugin, please. Let's turn this down a little bit. There we go. Just again, gain staging just to show what's going on. Notice how you can hear it way more. You can hear it way more in the mix, even though it's the same volume. Now, I would like to increase the volume of this sound. I'd actually like it to be just louder in volume. So now that I know that we are definitely changing the sound, it's one of the important parts of gain staging like this. It's making sure that what you're doing is actually imparting some kind of change onto the sound that you're applying it. Otherwise, you might as well not have it on. It's just taking up DSP and introducing delay that your track doesn't need. But since I know now that it is adding things that I like, I can move beyond the gain staging and get it to a volume I want, to a loudness I want. So I'm going to just remove this. Makes it a little bit more present in the mix. But if you notice, it's still a little bit lost. So what I'm going to do now is there's a few things I could do. One thing that I would consider doing is going in here and probably, I don't know if this one has it, but yeah, I would turn on doubling, which pushes it to the sides. Notice now, it gets a little bit pushed back because when it's just stereo, it means they have a stereo microphone pair recording the sound, whereas doubling means you have two mono recordings that are hard panned. So two separate recordings that are hard panned versus one recording that is split between two channels. So like this, all of a sudden, it gets way more noticeable. But you can also do that with other effects, such as chorus, like we used on the piano before. We could also do something like the Haas effect, which is kind of like a cheap fake doubling. Notice how it jumps out of the mix when I have that on. This will introduce phase cancellation to the signal, so you have to be really, really careful with this, but it's a good effect. And then, you know, things like auto panning can help. But it's a little bit inappropriate. So this is one of the reasons why I like to stress the importance of double tracking or multi-tracking, because like just having two different recordings of the instrument and all of a sudden it stands out in the mix more. Now let's give it some reverb to put in a space. Get a little bit of compression. There we go. Actually, I might make this a little bit more obvious and do parallel compression. There we go. So now this compressor is giving me both that squash signal and the dry dynamic signal. So we get that power, but we still keep the kind of human quality of it. So this would be kind of a way that I would start to introduce acoustic guitar. And again, this is gonna be for a specific context. All of these examples we've done so far are for this very sweet, summery, warm kind of thing. This has a very special context. Now, obviously, we'd have to mix these sounds. So, like, I would start to listen to this guitar. Now, I can see this guitar generally lives around 100 hertz. So I want to look at the other instruments and see if they need that 100 hertz range. I would say this doesn't. Let's pull this up higher. So the piano is really not that important. The piano is just there to provide texture to the sound. Now without it, the song is fine, but it definitely feels like it's missing something. Let's go to this. Now this is very full frequency, so I'm gonna have to start cutting it out. I'm actually gonna start getting rid of some of this high end too. I'm gonna boost some of this, because I want this to cut through a little bit more. Oh right, this is not on a melodic thing. That's why it feels so weird. We need this. Now let's check out this bass, see what we can get rid of. Now we need that sub for sure, but I don't think we need all this top end, right? So now, again, just sort of quick mixing here. I'm not going into some super in-depth mixing. I'm just sort of adding space to things. We don't really need it. It's really only providing that for us. See? That's really all it's providing for us. See how it works with the guitar? The guitar is all the way up here now. Acoustic guitar is down here. Piano is all the way up here, only in this space. Bass is all the way down here. Bass has all this room now to do whatever it wants. So really, I'm being quite aggressive with how much I'm cutting out of a lot of these sounds, especially the acoustic guitar, right? If I take this off, look at the frequency ranges it has. All this stuff down here, all this stuff here, and all this stuff up here. Severely restricting. I would even go further potentially and like start cutting out a lot of the stuff, make sure there's nothing below. 100 hertz. Yeah. So really, really, really cool stuff. I think this definitely helps if you're going for softer genres. If you're going for more aggressive genres, like real quick, I'm going to kind of sculpt up a dubstep loop just so that we can sort of see the difference, right? Let's get just drum loop 140. See what we got. Yeah, this will be good. All right, now I'm gonna get a bass loop 140. I don't really care, honestly, what it sounds like. We're just trying to get the vibe right. Cool. What I want to do here is I'm just going to get an 808 just to kind of layer this in. It's kind of getting some trappy stuff. A little bit kind of like hybrid trap right now, but that's okay. Just set this. Set this. Okay. So how would we add acoustic instruments into this? How would we add some sort of live sound into this? But now, how are we going to fit in live instruments here? There's really two main ways of doing it. One would be if we look at sort of the history of a style and play around with that. So for example, since we're making dubstep, kind of bass music stuff, I can go and grab like, let's grab this one, Island Strum, right? I'm just going to take this and I'm just going to have it basically go through an F minor and a C minor. And it's only going to be on these second and fourth hits. How do I get this to the right sound? I really only need like a tiny little hit of it. Because hopefully you see what I'm going for. I want like less of that. I literally just want like the first chuck. I wish I could make that shorter, but I guess we could do that with a different thing. Trying to get the pattern. That's okay. We can cut the MIDI or cut the note short. Let's take these. Why is this not doing a C minor chord? That's okay. There we go. So let's just take that, freeze and flatten it because I want to play with the audio for a second. Don't want this. Don't want this. Oh, calm down. Don't want this. Don't want this. There's our guitar loop. So do you notice something different compare the energy level. Again, this is what we are talking about when we get back to context. What is the context of the music that you're applying the live instrumentation to? This music is even louder than the house music we were making before. This is just loud. So these stabs are not going to cut it. They are way too quiet in the mix. So I'm going to be much more aggressive with how I process these. Before, if I was applying saturation or distortion, I was generally pretty light touch with it. Fuck that. I don't want noise, because that doesn't sound good, but I'm adding a lot of distortion here. I'm adding almost, nice. I'm adding almost 17 decibels of distortion to this sound. And it can take it. It sounds fine. Now, if I put that in the mix, it competes much more with everything else in the mixdown. It feels much more connected with the style of the music that we're making right now. We could add that in with a layer, but now what I want to do is not do that. I want to layer in an organ, right? So let's grab organ, ADG, anything will work here. Jazz organ, sure. And that's all we're doing. We're just adding on some chucks. Just like that. Go ahead. I don't even need to worry about it sounding good. I just need to quantize it. So notice also the guitar is totally audible, but notice how much more it sticks out when we have this organ added in. And also notice turning off the guitar makes the organ fall back. Because let's think about what these two sounds are doing together, right? This has a lot of harmonics, not a lot of attack, right? This is like all attack. This doesn't have a lot of stereo. This does. Together, they work to create a greater whole. And these are both live instruments. These are both acoustic sounds. If I wanted to add in a lead guitar, I would probably want it to be much more distorted. Could you adjust the attack in the organ to free up space of the transient? Well, the organ doesn't have a transient, right? And if it does, it's really minimal. So the idea is that they're actually already kind of mixing themselves. It's a good question. It's a good question, but thankfully the sound selection choice does that work for us. See? Look at the guitar. Or look at the organ. It has this very clear attack to it. If I set this to strummed acoustic and do the same recording. Oops, I gotta solo it, don't I? Yes. You can see much more of an attack right there. So adding them together, we get that attack, and we also get all this tail and tone out of it. But yeah, like if I wanted to add in something else here, I'd probably want to add something with distortion. I want to add something with even more aggressive processing. Like a lead guitar in here would need to be a very heavily distorted electric guitar. I don't think a live guitar would necessarily work here. Now, you can contrast this with something that is much more clean, but it's tough. Like, let's get a flute, for example, and show how we could maybe make this work. As it stands, this is probably not going to be good enough, but let's see if we can make it work. Add a little bit of a count in. There's our like little, deep dub lead melody. Shout out to the Whittler for that. Here, I don't want to distort the sound. All I want to do is bring it up to a standardized level of loudness to compete with everything else. There's probably a little bit more reverb for sure. So now, even though this isn't distorted, because we're processing it to be louder, we're adding gain to the signal to make it more consistent in volume, increase the loudness units of it. It competes with everything else, so the context is determining it. And this is sort of how I would approach a lot of these concepts. This is how I would start to introduce these elements. And beyond that, I think the key takeaway would be try to think not in terms of how do people use these genre or use these instruments in genres built around these instruments, but rather how do I use these sounds in the context of my music? What is it that all of the sounds in my music tend to revolve around? How much compression is on there? How much distortion is on there? How much reverb is on there? How many layers are there to these sounds? How many, sounds are in the same frequency ranges? Must add flute. It could work. It could work. And I honestly saying that, like, all you need to do is make sure that the flute competes with the context of everything else. It doesn't need to be distorted, but it probably is going to need to be heavily compressed in order to fit into the mix. It'll probably need to be double tracked, which I'm cheating this width knob to do, which is just adding spread to the signal. Notice how with the width up, it's a little bit more clear. It's similar to that strummed acoustic being doubled before, pushing it to the sides to make room for it. So hopefully that gives you some ideas on how you can add this stuff in.